Good morning, good evening, good day, whenever you're tuning in. This is Preston Smith with the Three Things, courtesy of The Corners magazine, and we are coming from MRP Studios. And as you see, we've got a guest, the founder.
Yeah, well, Craig
Studios.
Smith, Europa Property, Preston, congratulations on such a good show, and thank you for having me on this Friday afternoon.
We'll see. Yeah, this is Friday, September 8th, and you may be wondering, why is Preston wearing a baseball hat? He's not being formal. He's not taking it seriously. I am taking it seriously. Just I'm going out of town.
Weekend ready.
Weekend ready, let me tell you. And so we wanted to get in this show before we go out of town, because usually we actually film on Sunday nights. I'm not going to be here, but there's been a ton in the news. And we've got three things. Actually, we kind of only got two things for you today. But we're going to focus on Ukraine. I guess there's three. There's got to be at least three things here. And we're going to go through a little bit of the news, but then I am going to do the war report. And as I promised in the last show, I'm going to show you trench lines, advances. There's a ton to discuss there. But first, what we want to talk about for the first thing is what happened in the news. I'm going to start off. There's a few things that have happened, and there's been some things, especially in Poland, drummed up some of the press. We both know
Absolutely.
Ukrainians that are worried. Guess that's going to make us look like we're harboring fugitives or something. Right?
Well, it almost, if you look at the Russian news, it looks like we are.
It does. Let's hold that thought for a second. First, this week, the president of Ukraine, Zelenskyy, he announced that there's going to be a new defense minister. He nominated a new defense minister, and this is Rustam Umarov. I was corrected. Evgeny already corrected my pronunciation. He is of Crimean Tatar descent. What better, a person to help liberate Crimea?
Right.
And Reznikov
what
is
happened
out.
to Reznikov?
Alexei Reznikov. Well,
What happened? Because he always seemed like he was there from the beginning.
yeah, he was there from the beginning. That's a good subject. He was there from the beginning, and I don't think anybody's saying he did a bad job. There were a couple of flaps. There were a couple of issues where there were supplies that were delivered that the prices were kind of strange. They bought some from Turkey. When they did an audit, they found that they overpaid. There were a couple things like that, but I think really what it's coming down to is just the speed of the actual advance. Somebody's got to take the fall.
He did a pretty good job for the defense, I must say, defending against Russia.
You know, that's a good point, but I think in, as they say in Love and War, actually I don't know if they say that in Love and War, you're always punished for your good deeds, right?
No good deed goes unpunished.
Exactly. And so I think it maybe it was just time for him. I'm actually holding back. I know there have been some that have jumped on some of these past issues when it came to the tenders or to the overpaying. Look, it's war. Nothing has been proven that has gone directly to him. There's nothing. I haven't seen anything like that. Maybe there will be something like that, but it looks as if it was just time to make a change. Now, to the next topic, which actually sort of everybody was talking about this in Poland. This week, as you probably heard, there was a headline that came out first in the daily Rzeczpospolita Poland, but then it popped up all over the place. It was in Polish news. It was on in the Western press. It was in Russian blogs saying that Zelenskyy has talked to the different countries in Europe, and he's trying to get all of these Ukrainian men extradited back to Ukraine.
Right.
And in the headline, it said some 70, I think it was actually 77,000. It was between 70 and 80,000 Ukrainian men of fighting age had left Ukraine and were supposedly, at least in Poland, or at one time in Poland, and Ukraine wants them back, which is not a surprise.
No,
right?
Pretty scary if you're sitting in Warsaw and you're enjoying life, let's say.
Is, it is pretty scary. And to be honest, I rode, it's funny, I was riding I took an Uber, and my Uber driver was Ukrainian, and we just started talking, and he asked me what I did, and we started talking, and he goes, "Did you hear they're going to send us back?" That's what he asked me. And I was kind of like, it doesn't really work that way.
We are in the EU.
Yeah,
there is
exactly.
You have to prove a lot of different things.
Well, see, that's a good point, because the basis of, but we have to kind of backtrack a bit. Now, this story has actually come up several times over the last year, as you can imagine it would, that Ukraine is going to make all the men of fighting age go back to Ukraine to fight. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't go back to Ukraine to fight. I'm leaving that If you're Ukrainian, it's your country. I'm leaving that to you. But now, what has happened is that there are consequences or repercussions of basically the Ukrainian president taking a look at what was going on in Ukraine when it came to the draft boards. And it does look like there was a great deal of corruption there. The guys were going in and getting doctor's notes.
Getting out of town.
Yeah, Ukraine's not the first country to have people do that, right?
I think the U.S. did a lot of that in the 60s and 70s as well.
And that's
Canada.
That's a good example, because the U.S. tried to get guys to come back from Canada, and they didn't. They had a very difficult time with that.
Sure.
And one of the reasons why, and this is where reality has to set in, because actually the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs came out and said, look, this is essentially, they didn't use the term fake news, but this is essentially not how it works, because it isn't how it works. If you have a person that crosses the border illegally and he gets detained because he's in a country illegally, or maybe he's accused of committing a crime in another country, so paying off an official, that's corruption, that's a crime. This has to go through a court system. Now, I personally am not going to vouch for what's going on in the Ukrainian court system now during wartime. There may be a rush. I'm not even going to comment on that. But when it hits Poland, we are in the EU.
There's a lot of red tape.
And you got to find those guys.
Yeah.
But so you find the guys, then you got to go to court. You got to prove that there was some reason that he illegally evaded the draft, which would be the basis for extradition. There's not just a decree in Poland's going to run around or any of these other countries. Now, the Russian bloggers went to town on this stuff.
Yeah, that's good news for them.
Well, I mean, it's just damaging for the relationships between, and they really did go to town, and they made it. If you look at some of the Russian posts, it looks as if, see all these countries in the EU, they're just going to round these guys up and send them back, which you might think, well, yeah, but that's not good for Russia if they go back. But the rounding up bit,
sounds scary.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's scary. Democracy. Yeah. It makes everyone look good, and it's very, very possible. I actually don't really have much doubt that there has been a lobby from the Ukrainian side to say, look, if we process these, are you guys going to follow through on your side judicially and send these guys back? But that process, man, that's a long, tough thing. I'll give you an example of how it works. I've had to, as a detective, I've had to chase guys down.
Sure.
These are called skip traces. So it might be just something that a guy didn't pay alimony in the U.S. and he's in Poland. Okay. A lot of times what happens is the law firm calls us up and says, hey, can you find the guy?
Right.
Now, right there, if the guy is here semi-legally, semi-illegally, he doesn't have a registered address, maybe he does, but he's gone to sleep on the couch of some girl he met, or he's staying with friends and they're fishing and he's just hiding out. We find him, because we always find him. We find him, but then we give the location maybe to the law firm or whatever, if the law firm pays us, because if we find a guy like that, we're doing surveillance, we're tracking all that.
Yeah, a lot of work.
Yeah, but then, project's over, and the court tries to find him sitting at the lake in 3 weeks or a month or 2 months.
I thought you just tied him up and threw him in the back of the car until the court documents came.
That's what people think.
Yeah.
That's what people think.
That's what I saw on TV. I know what you guys do.
Yeah, you know what. So actually this stuff, and I'm laughing, but it's not funny. There are actually, in fact, I even know of families here where the Ukrainian, I know one family, there's a Ukrainian man, I think now he maybe even have like Polish citizenship, or he's trying for whatever, but he, as I actually know, he is injured, he can't hardly walk. These kind of guys, they're worried about still something happening and just getting shipped back. Right. Because we are hearing stories about it, just as you are in Russia, and maybe not to that extent, but there are always going to be stories of, is this person really fit to be drafted? Anytime you have a draft, you get into that kind of argument. Was he really fit? Should he have been sent to the front? He's an older guy, or he's not in shape, or he's got a slip disc in his back. So all these things start, to come into play and become, controversial, whether they really are or not. But as far as sort of a roundup, that's
not going to happen in Europe.
That's not going to happen. Now, the last thing, which you probably...
Well, what about on this one? What about, because I'm running into, and I remember this, there was a lot of teenagers coming with their moms. These guys are 16, 17. Now they're getting close to 18.
That is the other thing which is scaring the hell out of a lot of people, and it just is. And you can imagine, and you know, that scenario, what do you say to that? Because then the kid, if let's say he's 18, so he's of age.
Yeah, you bring him here, you want to save him, and then now all of a sudden he's 18,
and they've
you send him
gone
back.
through that whole emotional, they got out of Ukraine legally, because these were
legally,
kids,
they're here illegally. Yeah, they're
during
here
a time which was extremely stressful, when you know, it wasn't just that the war was way far away from Kiev or whatever. There were people getting attacked and hit, you know, literally very close to, all the way, you know, getting close to the border. They got out, they came to Poland, they assimilated, they started to go to school here, they started to learn. I mean, actually, I know in the schools you got, you know, there's even, you know, you got the Ukrainian kids, you got the Polish kids, sometimes get along, sometimes they don't. All those things that a family goes through, and now suddenly the kid turns 18.
So what is the law? What happens now?
The way that as far as the extradition side of it goes, they will have to be proven to have committed a crime. Okay, so that means the guys that were old enough, maybe they paid somebody, they got a fake doctor note, and then they left. And
but
they
a lot of these were younger.
Yeah, well, and they shouldn't have been allowed to leave. Those guys, if it goes through that process, and they could get extradited and go back. You know, okay. A younger kid who's here, who left, he hasn't committed a crime.
No, he's 17. Came with mom and dad.
Exactly.
Or mom.
So he hasn't committed a crime. So there's not a basis in anything that I've been able to find out, and I made some calls, there's not a basis of him being somebody that would be on that list to be targeted, to be extradited based on having committed a crime. Those guys would be the first guys to be targeted. But you got to remember, this is a process. Can you imagine processing 70,000 criminal cases and trying to extradite them?
Yeah.
I'll give you an idea. I've been involved in criminal cases where one guy who laundered millions, and they wanted to extradite them, and that went on forever. Now, he had very expensive lawyers.
So bottom line, the Ukrainian government are not going to get people unless they really want to come, and they get on the train and they go.
I see that it's going to be quite difficult. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, hey, I'm saying get out of jail free, don't fight for your country. Just completely being objective. This is a process, and if it starts, it's difficult. And it's not going to solve Ukrainians' problems with putting bodies in uniform quickly. It's just not. Now, the last thing in the news, and there's already 3 things, I haven't even gotten to the war report, is $1 billion in aid for Ukraine.
Yeah.
Which Ukraine's got to be happy about that.
That's a big number.
Yeah, Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Ukraine this week. I'm sure all of you guys, Ukrainian watchers of our show, that's kind of.
I like how they just go in billions now. It's not even like billions. A couple hundred million. It's just billions. It's a billion. Now. Yeah.
But there is controversy with that. And the controversy is this. And this came from kind of the Russian side. This is another Russian blogging thing. And you can tell me if you've heard this. The way that it is now, it came out, and I've seen these stories in English, I've seen them, and I'm sure they're coming more from the Russian side, is that if the Ukrainians don't reach Tokmak, then kind of forget about the next wave of big aid. They've got to make progress. They've got to reach Tokmak by November. That's what they're saying that Blinken said this.
Well, from what I understand, Blinken doesn't even know where Tokmak is. They're going to just give them $1 billion, and if they get there, they get another $1 billion. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but
as you know, Craig is a Republican.
I don't think it has any. They have any idea where that is. It's just we're sending $1 billion.
But did you hear Blinken say this? That there's a deadline.
No,
okay, I didn't hear this at all. What has been stated, but not coming from Blinken, to be fair, is that Tokmak is key, and we'll talk about in the Ukrainian War Report. Some of you are not going to know where that is, but if you're down in the Zaporizhzhia front, down the southern front, you've got Robotyne, which there's been kind of a semi-breakthrough there. The Ukrainians are pushing very, very hard. But one of the goals would be to reach Tokmak, because that would cut off Russian supply lines and give them a chance to basically go for a Melitopol or go for the Azov Sea, go for, just keep going south. That would be a huge military accomplishment if they could do that quickly. Now,
but he did say about this depleted, he was selling them the
well,
depleted
that's another
uranium
thing.
shells.
Oh, that's
so
another thing. But before we get to that, because the Russians, they didn't like that.
No,
either.
I bet they didn't.
like
I bet that was
But
not nice.
But when it comes to top, the one thing that has been made clear is that a lot of this is going to depend on the weather. Once it starts raining, once it starts getting muddy, once the summer is over, it's going to be pretty tough to do. So this November, that's about the longest that. If the weather holds until November, I think everyone's going to be lucky.
Let's see in the next few weeks if it starts raining.
And then, you could say, okay, if they don't actually make progress here, it's going to be tough to get another billion. I mean, $1 billion is a lot. So maybe you could kind of looked at it, but they're kind of putting words in Blinken's mouth, which at least I haven't heard. And when I saw that, I went and looked for it. I didn't see it. Now, this may be a rebound from the depleted uranium ammunition.
Because they are a bit nervous about that, I think.
They are.
And those are big shells.
Those are big
pretty
shells,
nasty.
and they're supposed to be actually delivered by September.
Right.
And
we're in September.
Well, and what does that mean? What uses depleted uranium shells? Well, Abrams tanks.
Yeah.
And there's been talk about the Abrams tanks, when they're going to get. Well, they may be there a little sooner than we expected, which wouldn't be a surprise, because remember when they had the discussion about cluster munitions that went on, and one day they said, yes, we're going to send them. The next thing you know, literally the next day, the Ukrainians are using cluster munitions across the front.
Well,
so
it's on the way.
It's on the way. Yeah, very quick logistics. So those are really the big developments for the week, but they are big developments, and we'll see especially what happens as September plays out. Now, it's hard for me to believe they got the Abrams tanks here this quickly. Maybe they did. The next question is, how well will they work in this crazy war where, as we know, even a Challenger got hit 2 days ago. As we know, tanks, armored vehicles, Bradleys have proven to be really tough, but everything is vulnerable to drones.
Well, plus probably just sinking an Abrams tank in the mud, digging that out can't be easy.
No, that would be easy. So there again is a limited timeline there. But anyway, that's it for the first 1, 2, 3, 4 things, something like that. The Ukrainian Battlefield Report is next. But thanks for coming on the show.
Great to always be on. Yeah.
And cool studio.
Yeah. It is very nice here.
Actually, I got to say, also, Evgeny has done a great job. This is a great studio. If you guys are looking for places to do your company blogs or to come on down, that's my pitch.
Yeah, MRP Studios is the place.
MRP Studios is the place to do it. All right, now for the second thing, let's go. Okay, now for the second thing, or maybe we'll count it as the third thing since it's the weekend special edition. We're going to go through the Ukrainian Battlefield Report, the War Report. As I mentioned, this is kind of just an entire segment on the Ukrainian War. There has been there's really a lot to talk about, but I'm also going to add in a few details, some of the things that I've sort of skimmed through in the past, so stick with me. First, we're going to go down and start a lot of times I start up in the north, but we're going to start down in the south on the Zaporizhzhia front. So let's go to Robotnya. Now, as you see on this map, the Robotnya map, these are from Deepstate UA, because I want to make sure and give those guys credit, because they do an amazing job. But I wanted to show the actual lines, the fortification lines, the trench lines, right? So you can see this. Now, we've talked about what is going on there and how there is, a critical push going on at this time in Robotnya. And on one hand, it gets lauded that this is a huge breakthrough. On the other hand, it's not moving fast enough. There was a lot of tension leading up to, obviously, as we just spoke about in the first thing about the next round of funds coming from the U.S. Well, they got $1 billion, and no, I don't believe this tale. I couldn't find it. If I'm wrong, send in the link and prove me wrong. But I don't believe that Blinken said you've got till November. If you don't take Tokmak by November, then you're done. However, November, again, if the weather holds out that long, that is going to really be something. And you can see, if you take a look at the map, you can see the kind of grayish pink or the pink area, because you've got Robotnia, and the Ukrainians have taken Robotnia, and then you've got this kind of barrier area, which is kind of grayish pink. And that's what we would say, let's call that the disputed area. Now, if you look to the southeast, you see Verbove. If you look straight down below Robotnia, you've got Novoprokopivka, I still can't pronounce it, and what we're hearing is that the Ukrainians are not making a lot of progress towards Novoprokopivka. They pushed towards it. They've been slowed down. They're getting hit. They're being shelled from. If you see where Kopani is, that whole side to the west, you've got the Russians dug in there, and they're shelling, making it difficult on them. This may be why you've got such a hard push towards Verbove. Now, Verbove is really interesting, and if you take a look. I'm going to show you actually a satellite map, okay? Now, you can see on the satellite map, you've got Verbove, and you can see the town. Now, most of these towns, whether you're talking about Robotnia, whether you're talking about Verbove, whether you're talking about Andriivka, they're just flattened, they're annihilated. But when you take a look at the top, at the actual satellite maps, you can see sort of the remnants of the city. Sometimes it gives you a little bit of an idea of what's happening. Now you see these white lines, those are the Russian trench line fortifications, and it kind of suddenly makes sense, because if we take a look at that map and we know that the Ukrainians were driving down hard towards Verbove, they kind of threaded between those two trenches and tried to drive in and take it. They have not made more progress there from what we know, although right now what may be happening is that there are kind of pushes, test drives, you want to say it, or that's not very much when it comes to military jargon, is it? But there are some probing maneuvers, and the rumor or the story is that the tanks are lined up and they're going to make a hard push. Now, whether that is actually Ukrainian strategy or not, I cannot say that I know. But what I can say is that when we go back to that map and you see the fortifications and you see where Tokmak is, and you take a look at this, and you see Robotnia up way on the top, you see Verbove to the east, but then you go all the way down and you see Tokmak. And you look at these trench lines. If you see, again, look at that kind of grayish pink area, which is disputed, and probably the Ukrainians are already in that area. So they've crossed, they've crossed some fortifications towards Verbove, or they're in that general range to when you look to the east of Robotnia. But then look what they've got to do. They've got to get through other fortifications, get all the way down and hit Tokmak. And from what we know, the Russians are not just sitting there doing nothing. They are actually trying to fortify, put down more mines. This is going to be a tough thing now. And it's one of these cases that the Russians have used from time goes by, forever. Go back, look at the Second World War. Just eat time, fall back, eat time, fall back on defense. That looks like this is kind of what their strategy is going to be there. Although, as we know, they did bring in reinforcements, better, highly trained, skilled guys to come in and bolster the defenses that were already there. No matter how we look at it, this is going to be a tough road, and I don't think there's any other way to put it. And I think those fortification lines indicate that very, very well. Now, let's jump up to Staromorsky, as we typically do. Not really a whole lot is going on there since we last spoke, which granted was only a few days ago. The Ukrainians are attacking. We're not seeing a ton of progress there. There was, I have to say that I was really getting very optimistic, especially when I heard that they were already on the edges of Vitne Bajane. The push in Urozhaine looks like it's slowed down. There doesn't seem to be a lot for me to tell you there. If you take a look at this other map, we've got Staromorsky and you got Urozhaine, and then again you've got kind of the disputed area. You kind of see where everything is, and I've found no information and none of my sources have given me any information to say that anything there has changed significantly. So let's kind of keep going north. Let's keep going north, and now we're getting up into really an interesting part of the front. Now, this is what I call the Svatove front. Now, if you take a look at the Svatove, I'll show you one map first, but then we're going to go down back south a little bit. If you take a look at this larger map, and again, if you look over on the west, you'll see Borova. If you look where the line, where the front is, and up at the top, you got Novoselivsky, you've got Andreevka, you've got Novohorivka, right? Now, below that, further south of that, what we have is there's a town, Bilohorivka. Now here, the Russians are actually pushing hard. This looks like they are trying to actually do something serious. You can see those arrows, right, where you've got Russian forces trying to advance. We know there's intense fighting there. I don't know much more about what is going on, if the Russians are actually making any progress, but it seems they are making a little. This is of note, because if we go back to the larger map where you see Borova, and remember, I've talked about this in every show, that there were the worries that there was the buildup of 100,000 Russians in this region, and then further north, maybe another 100,000, and there's going to be a big Russian offensive that's going to be coming. This doesn't look like this is off the cards. You see that there's a push down at Novohorivka. At Novoselivsky, there was some fighting only days ago. And Andreevka, there's been some fighting. We're not seeing any real progress here, but I wouldn't put it past the Russians to go for another hard push in that vicinity. Now, let's go up to Kupiansk, where things are actually pretty hot. Now, if you take a look at Kupiansk, and you should know by now, we've talked about this so often, I'm sure you know what you can kind of orientate yourself in the big picture. The Russians are still pushing down hard from Liman-Pershi. We talked about how that they have a newly formed army, a regiment up there, the 25th, which maybe is not that well trained, not that well skilled, but it's not, they're not lacking for trying. There are reports now that they may have taken at least part of Sikivka. That I'm not seeing represented yet on Deepstate UA maps. And Deepstate UA, they're pretty good at going through everything from news to social media to videos, video reports that surface from the Russian side, from the Ukrainian side. However, if they haven't taken it, they're putting a great deal of pressure on that. We're not hearing that they've made any other progress. However, this is again, there's a lot of pressure there. Now, going back to what we were talking about with the Ukrainians needing more bodies, there have been some reports that have come out that basically suggesting that the Ukrainians got 3 weeks training in the West, and then they're thrown right into this fight. Maybe they're not ready because they're dealing with hardcore veterans, guys that have been in the fight for quite a long time. That may well be true. We just have to look at this in sober fashion. That may well be true. But we're not seeing yet signs of the Russians actually making a real breakthrough there. It's more of just one more of these stories that we've run into again and again, where the Russians actually, or the Ukrainians, they fight over a settlement. The settlement just gets completely destroyed, and it kind of becomes, like World War I trench warfare, except using drones. Now, I just realized that I believe I left out Bakhmut, which I actually did leave out Bakhmut. So I left out Bakhmut. Let's jump to Bakhmut very quickly because it's actually important. If you take a look at Bakhmut, and here's the big picture. Now, Bakhmut has been in the news forever. There was a great deal of debate why the Russians want it so bad, because it's not strategically or tactically important. Turns out maybe it was. It became important because it became a meat grinder for both the Ukrainians and the Russians. And now it apparently still is important. We know that this week the President Zelenskyy, he visited with the troops there, was congratulating them, handing out medals. There seems to be a bit of a focus on this, even though, we tend to look now at Robotnia and Zaporizhia, etc. But here's what's interesting. Now, in the north, not a lot to say. The Ukrainians have been trying to push, but they haven't been able to, towards the Ahidny, towards Berhivka. Not a lot has gone on. But in the south, we've talked about Klishevka and also Andrivka, which is just below it. Now, if you take a look at this closer map, you can see it, and from reports, I can see it. I'm not sure how much I should put into this to believe it, but it does look like the Ukrainians have decided to do something which is really quite interesting in the context of the war. If you take a look down at Andrivka on this map, you can see it better. Now you see that the Russians, they're sitting in Andrivka, and you've got this kind of gray zone, this gray pinkish zone, where the Ukrainians are pushing forward or it's disputed. What we understand is that the Ukrainians are trying to pull off on both sides, north and south of Andrivka, which eventually would become a pincer-type movement, and the Russians there would be trapped. And that is apparently going very well. What is interesting is it may be somewhat the same in Klishevka to the north. This is where, and this may be something that we see more and more in the future, because we go down to Robotnia again, and we saw how there's the push towards Verbove, not necessarily as straight, hard south. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but there seems to be a push towards Verbove. If you take a look at Staromayorsk and you look at Orozhaine, these different settlements or towns, they become absolutely flattened. I've seen photos of Andrivka, and it was a very small place to begin with. And you might as well say there's just nothing there. When I say there's nothing there, there is nothing there. It's like, maybe I can find a photo and put it up here in the blog, but it looks like some old basketball courts. That's how flattened it is by now. So what we may start seeing, which goes, this war in a lot of ways is now becoming different than any kind of war, in the sense that you tried to take a city. Maybe the city was obliterated, but the city was still the city. Cities become rebuilt. Warsaw is a great example. The Russians, their fight over Stalingrad is a great example in World War II. Well, now we're getting into wars where, because of the artillery, the drones, the concept, where there literally is nothing left of a settlement. In fact, the settlement itself becomes a detriment because there's nowhere to hide. There are examples where it looks like the Russians turn their artillery on these small settlements and literally try to flatten everything so that the Ukrainians cannot even be in the settlement. They can't build up. So what we may start to see are more and more pivots off of settlements. So if the Russians are holding, let's say, Andrivka, the Ukrainians go to the north and south, the pincer movement, and they bottle them up and then move forward, and they don't even treat it as a settlement anymore. They just treat it as somewhere to bottle up and to eventually starve out while they move forward. On the flip side, these types of drives like Robotnia, whatever, they become, in themselves, they become vulnerable because they become a salient that can be hit by artillery, what the Russians are trying to do. But we see the Ukrainians pushing towards Verbove, and maybe they will angle back and go to Tokmak, like what we said. It goes back, I think, in that Hemingway novel, Farewell to Arms. In the beginning of the novel, Hemingway talks about, there's a point where everybody has to come down off the mountains and fight. This is kind of becoming the same type of thing. There's a point where you have to leave the settlements behind and drive. Of course, this becomes very, very difficult when you go and take a look at some of these maps that are the satellite maps, and you see that you've got tree lines and you've got open fields. Let me see, there's one, I want to put one more up here for you. You got tree lines and open fields. The problem is, as soon as you get in the open fields, if they're not mined, then these guys are getting droned to death. So a lot of these drives, they become kind of battles for tree lines or fights along tree lines. And if I can find quickly a good example of that, yeah. So if you take a look, for example, at this Novehorivka, right? Now take a look, here's just a quick, and maybe this isn't the best example, but if you see where the Russians are driving off on the right, they're driving straight at Novehorivka. If you can take a look, they're also in the north, But a lot of these drives, de facto, they end up going sort of battles to go along tree lines or for tree lines, or, you know, sometimes there are fortifications, say, behind rail lines. But what no one wants to be caught dead out in the fields. Now, another issue that we're going to find is that you've got roads that are good roads. You got roads that work fine right now because of the season. But when the rains come, there are only going to be some roads that actually are usable and passable. And that's greatly going to impact the Ukrainians, how they're going to drive forward, because then you get into almost like a battle for Arnhem type situation where all the troops, the tanks, the vehicles, everybody has to go up one road because everything else turns to mud and it just becomes impassable, especially with something as heavy as an Abrams tank. Now, I was a little bit chaotic for this rush weekend report, but hey, it's Friday and I am finally going to give myself a little bit of a break and take off for the weekend. Just a few days, but we will be back on schedule next week. Actually, a week from Tuesday, we'll have the next 3 things. Otherwise, hang in there. I will be putting up some updates on the Corners website, thecorners.pl. So go ahead and check there, and always feel free to get in touch. And you can write me. I probably shouldn't say this. You can write me at query@cddi.pl or thecornersmag@gmail.com. So you can write letters to the editors. You can participate in the Fiction Friday contest. I got novels instead of short stories, which is why I haven't started putting those up. But some of those will go up pretty soon. Feel free to get in. If you disagree with me, you just want to write me and say, hey, Preston, great show. I'm up for that too. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Over and out. Cześć, na slenido, and bye-bye.